Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Our subject for the session is Saudi Arabia and Translating Cultures. My name is Moneera Al-Ghadeer. I'm here as the Arts and Culture Strategy Consultant with multiple years of experience in international cultural relations. The session that we'll be discussing and exploring is the intersection of translation and cultural studies, the consideration of both words on the page and the context behind it. This will all be done within the Saudi Arabian context, and we will also be able to address the different translation efforts of the last 3 decades, the comparison between the translation of Saudi literary works to the world and the abundance of Western texts rendered to the Arabic language. We'll explore the reasons of all of this, the imbalance, the differences, and all in between. Our panelists today are the wonderful Dr. Moneera Al-Ghadeer. Dr. Moneera is a visiting professor of comparative literature in Columbia University in the US, a show-off visiting professor at Harvard University. Notably, Dr. Moneera published Desert Voices, Bedouin Women's Poetry in Saudi Arabia, the very first English translation and theoretical analysis of Bedouin women's oral poetry. So that's something that's absolutely fantastic within the Arabian Peninsula. We have Dr. Abdul Aziz Alsebail. He is the Secretary General of the King Faisal Prize, and an annual award presented to those who have made outstanding contributions in a variety of fields, so one of which includes Arabic language and literature. Dr. Abdul Aziz also won the Cultural Personality of the Year Award in the Saudi Arabian National Culture Awards in 2022 for his rich literary career. He's also held many prestigious positions, such as the Deputy Minister of Cultural Affairs in the previous Ministry of Culture and Information, as well as the Chairman of the Arabic Language Department of King Abdul Aziz University. I believe we are in very, very good hands today for the topics at hand. And without further ado, I request kindly from Dr. Moneera to begin and share with us her views on translating cultures and the transnationality of Saudi culture.
Thank you so much, Noura, for this wonderful introduction. I was visiting professor, no longer. But thank you for your gracious introduction. Also, I would like, to thank the Commission of Literature, Publishing, and Translation for their exciting, program and for the invitation. And I'm so delighted to be with you, and thank you for coming. For the sake of time, if you don't mind, I would like, to read my presentation. Hopefully, it will not be too long. And as Noura suggested, that I'll be talking about translating culture, which is a concept within translation studies, and in relation to what I called transnationality of Saudi culture. As we all know, the foundation of many civilizations rests upon the translation of knowledge from other cultures, and by extension on the translation of cultures themselves. The view of translation as a transformative cultural experience, as Homi Bhabha, Gayatri Spivak, and others have theorized it, is central to understanding the ways in which translation can foster cultural dialogue between nations. Although the translation of cultures is still an emerging field, it already wields significant influence over translation theory and extends to domain within the humanities, social science, and international relations. As we delve into the theory and practice of translating cultures and consider the complexity of translating Saudi Arabia for Western audiences, several key questions emerge. Where does our understanding of culture meet translation? And how does translation both challenge and transfer culture? What are the implications of examining culture within the field of translation studies? And how have these implications led scholars to consider both text and context as essential objects of study, laying the groundwork for translating cultures? In this presentation, I will highlight how we have reached translating culture as a concept, as a stream, if you wish, within translation studies. And we may also consider as I said, the translation of Saudi Arabia. And that's in itself a very powerful, a presupposition and requires a different presentation by itself. Although translation is commonly understood to mean the process of rendering something from one language to another, the term translation derives from Latin, the Latin terms trans and fero, which means carrying across or bridging across, implying a guided journey rather than a simple substitution of words. This bridging of languages has taken place from the earliest days of human civilization, but translation developed as a field of study only in the past half, as we will see, half century, driven by financial and technological globalization from a new discipline that existed on the margin of humanities. Most of translation scholars and theorists, they always highlighted the fact that translation studies as a field was always pushed aside on the margin of humanities. And also in terms of the curricula development in academic settings. The roots of cultural translation can be traced within anthropological context, and the concept itself, cultural translation, was also discredited by anthropologists themselves. I mean, it created heated discussions, and I'm not going to go into that, track, but we will see how also it was linked to other fields like critical, studies, such as post-colonial theorists who started working with this, again, concept, we would like, to call it that, cultural translation within, post-colonial theory. And this concept, again, was connected or collapsed, I would say, with hybridity. Homi Bhabha located translation, and you remember his book, The Location of Cultures. Homi Bhabha located translation within the migrant culture and the in-between. This is very important, this moment in between, whether it's disciplines, cultures, languages, and so on and so forth. So this in-betweenness created also a minority position which dramatizes the activity of cultures and translatability, the inability to translate, culture. Of course, his position, Homi Bhabha's position, was also critiqued, and there are fascinating, arguments problematizing bringing cultural translation within post-colonial studies. As you know, also, post-colonial study relies and is informed, and I would say shaped by post-structuralist thought, like the Derridian, the French theorists, philosophers, and others. So Homi Bhabha suggested something, very interesting, and I'm going to just cite that very quickly. Quote, language and culture are not stable sites of meaning. This is very important. Language and cultures are not stable sites of meaning, but are characterized by deferral, displacement, and dislocation. Meaning or meanings are contingent, and identities are fluid. This statement is already, you can see it's informed by Derridian and Foucauldian, and the list goes on of French theorists. Although the discussion of cultural translation within post-colonial studies was deployed, this is very important again, was deployed as a metaphor to reflect on cross-cultural interaction rather than actual translation or, when we talk about translating a text per se. Its emphasis on the importance of reading culture and its influence in the humanities paved the way for new development within the larger discipline of translation studies. This is a very fascinating, discussion and can lead to Edward Said and also his understanding of colonialism and how it created hybridity and affected also the formation of identity and the notion of, cultural translation. For instance, Spivak, what I really liked about also her problematization of Homi Bhabha's discussion is the fact that she looked at translation as a moment of reading or reading and writing in relation, to translation. And she mentioned it's the most intimate act of reading. That's for her translation. And she put also emphasis on the importance of having this intimate knowledge of other cultures when you are working on translation and educating yourself about, those cultures, their languages, and not just coming as an outsider. If you want, also to think just for your own, for the sake of our panel today, if we think who really coined translation studies, it is the poet and translator James Holmes coined this, let's say, field, the name of this field, in 1972. So it's a very young discipline, in comparison to other disciplines in the humanities and others in social sciences. So 6 years after that, Andrea Lovieva defined the focus of the new field. It's very interesting here. Quote, the problem, raised by the production and description of translation. So for him, he defines the field based on these problems that were generated when we are trying, to think of the production of translation. Very interesting, or describe it. In 1980, Susan Besnet authored a landmark study of the complexity of the emerging field, arguing its reach, that its reach extended far beyond other fields like linguistics, comparative studies, and in 1990s, Besnet again and Loviev redefined the field yet again, suggesting that translation studies looked at cultural studies. This is a very important, again, moment in the development in the field of translation studies. It's this encounter between cultural studies as another domain in the humanities, and I think most of you are academics here and aware of, its trajectory. And when it encounter, translation studies, Besnet and Loviev came up, especially Besnet, with the cultural turn. Something happened in the field that allowed, the claiming of culture in translation studies. It's not, what's the influence of culture when we translate, or cultural translation, or other, references to culture. But as a matter of fact, now we are talking about a new concept. Again, we're talking about, really a new turn, like in the field. It is translating cultures. This is very important, moment in translation studies. I'm not going to go into, longer discussion here, but it's just a very quick highlight. Of course, this moment led to a rethinking of the meaning of translation in the global context, as scholars began to consider the role of publishers, editors, illustrators, copy editors, readers, and other agents in the world's making and marketing and transmission of text. And this is, I think, part of the Frankfurt, book fair. By examining translation through this lens, we can perhaps better understand a puzzling trend, the struggle of some of the last 3 decades' best new voices. And I make this argument as a scholar of comparative literature, and someone who is, always keeping an eye on the new writing in the region, the Arabian Peninsula and Saudi Arabia, that I will argue that the best writing of none, in I would say, in languages other than English, it came from, that part of the world. And we have many, examples to develop and discuss that. The other, main idea, since I don't have time and I took, longer time in this, kind of trying, to trace the development of translating cultures, it's the presence of literature from the Arabian Peninsula within world literature. Here we have a serious problem. If you go to anthologies of world literature, maybe you can find Abdurrahman Munif, if you're lucky. Other than that, you will not. Maybe Dr. Abdul Aziz will enlighten us and elaborate on this, intersection. So here we have a serious, dilemma, which is, the presence of literature from the Arabian Peninsula in the global stage within world literature. I think, translation is a factor. Publishing is another, and I call it the elephant in the room that we need, to discuss and come up with strategies. We have many challenges. Literature from the region cannot find publishing, or, always it's a struggle for authors, translators, and editors to find, a publisher will welcome this, this, literary and cultural production. So here we have, I think, an opportunity to think of creative, solutions. Another point, and I'm going to conclude, I have a lot on it, perhaps, in the Q&A, it's how can we begin thinking of translating cultures in relation to translating a nation? Can we say that the translated, literature one, or cultural artifact, or also the cultural events, international and local, can they also contribute to translating a nation, to translating a specific culture? For instance, all of the activities, all of the initiatives by the Commission of Literature and Publishing and Translation. They have amazing, long lists. I'm not going to enumerate them. I will take a long time. Can these initiatives contribute to translating Saudi Arabia and also Saudi Arabian culture? And I think this is a very interesting, also inquiry to reflect on. I would like us also in the Q&A to think of ways, how can we, for instance, encourage and promote the representation of the Arabian Peninsula literature, literature from Saudi Arabia in the larger, context of world literature, and also in the curricula, in Middle Eastern curricula and Western institutions. Our presence is always fragmented, or it's not there. And I can tell you about my experience later on. And I think, I should just stop here, and we'll take it later in the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Moneera. You really posed a lot of really interesting questions, and I think you made a really good point about the guided journey in translation. I had no idea, but it feels now a lot more personable. So I think that's a wonderful point. Thank you so much. And now we go to Dr. Abdul Aziz Alsebail. He's going to be talking to us about translating Saudi literature into English. Thank you, Dr.
Mind, I'll go there.
Yes, please.
Thank you. مساء الخير أيها الأخوات والإخوة. Hello everybody. Thank you, Noura, And thank you, Dr. Moneera, for this great, I don't want to say introduction. It's a deep research, in fact, but what you said at the end, it's really probably makes me go directly to the subject here. And when we are speaking of the literature on Arabia, we have to go back 15 centuries ago, even before the rise of Islam, because the literature of Arabia, from the pre-Islamic period, actually, it came from that area, which we know now, Arabia, which is now, of course, Saudi Arabia and other small Gulf country. But in speaking of the modern Saudi literature, we'll go back only for 1 century. This is upon the unification of the area, in fact, under the new name of the area, which is Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. This time where we start, in fact, this different literature, poetry, short story, plays, and novels, etc. But the translation, unfortunately, started much later. To be accurate, unfortunately now, we have more than 200 books that has been translated. Poetry, novels, and short stories. How good, how bad, that I'm gonna probably talk about a little bit. But the best and the first translation, if I can have the first photo, please. I don't know, you have them here? If you don't have it, I have it here in my hand anyway. It's that book here. Maybe you can see it. Okay. The blue one here, The Literature of Modern Arabian Anthology. This book was edited by late, great critics and translator Salma Al-Ghadeer Al-Jayusi. I'm sure you know her. Oh, welcome, Dr. Ali. I'm glad to see you here, Doctora. Ahlan wa sahlan. And Salma Al-Ghadeer Al-Jayusi, actually what she did with the help of King Saud University at that time, in fact, they did not concentrate on Saudi Arabia. They said Arabia, and Arabia, of course, will include, as you know, Yemen, Oman, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, and Kuwait. But now, mostly when you say Arabia, because Saudi Arabia is take the large part of it, and even the name is Saudi Arabia. And you can tell, look at these titles here. Voices of Change, okay? Saudi Arabian. The New Voices of Arabia. The New Voices of Arabia, they emphasize, the publisher emphasized Arabia. When you say Arabia, of course, the Westerners have in mind what? Have in mind the Arabian Nights, 1001 Nights. And to be honest, maybe for marketing, they add this Arabia. And they are expecting, or they want the reader to expect probably these books will take them back to the Arabian Nights. But the reality, these books have nothing to do with Arabian Nights at all. The Arabian Nights, I mean, for at least for the Westerners, they like it so much because, as you know, it means a lot to them. I'm going to mention that probably later. But all these, of course, we have poetry here, you see, but also most of it you have novels, and you see this is Voices of Change. This is by women's only. Of course, Westerners would like to see how the creative writers, women creative writers, deals with the issue of the society, and especially related to the women's issue. I would like to see the other, just to see the differences in the covers here. Look, this is Beyond the Dawns, Anthology of Modern Saudi Literature. You see the covers. You see Beyond the Dawns, Voice of a New Arabia, and only the desert you see. And this is the stereotyping of our region. This is a country that almost, there is nothing there except desert. And this is the stereotyping that's probably for a long time ago. I'm sure, in fact, now with the modern change in Saudi Arabia, Emirates, and other Gulf countries, this stereotyping is hopefully, I'm hoping, to start changing, in fact. But this publisher emphasizes this motif of the desert. In one of them, as you can see, the Assassination of Light, they add camels, not only the desert. Maybe you can see the second one. Camels and the veiled women as well. This is the atmosphere that goes to the Arabia. And most of the books that were translated, either short story or novels. And in my belief, in fact, narratives is the best to export from culture to another culture. With my respect to the poetry, but poetry now, especially modern poetry, is became more of a human themes rather than being reflected to certain issues inside a society. But short story and novels, in fact, give you the reflections. And interestingly speaking, I was looking at the Nobel Prize winner of literature. Most of the laureates, I would say probably, it's not probably, it's exactly 90% of the laureates of Nobel Prize for literature were or are writers of narratives. Not poets, or there are some poets, of course, narratives. Because narratives is the one, is this genre that really introduce the culture in different subjects, they are dealing with. Nobel Prize winner, Najib Mahfouz, of course, as you know, he is the only Arab writer who got Nobel Prize. But don't be surprised, because other people say, why only one from the Arab? I said, don't worry. By looking at the winners or the laureates from Nobel Prize, you will find that 90% of the laureates are from the West, America and Europe. You name them, China 2, Japan 1, South America probably 2 or 3. They're less than 15 people out of 120 plus laureates. And this is probably the academia or the institutions here in the West should probably look at other cultures. I mean, I'm sure there are great cultures that they have also some creative writing need or deserve to be introduced, deserve to be translated as well. But for the Arabic literature, probably before 1988, when Najib Mahfouz won the Nobel Prize, and after, this is two different history, in fact. When Najib Mahfouz was translated, to be honest, international readers who are interested in literature, in fact, somehow get the attention or pay more attention to Arabic literature, and it really it helps not on translating of Najib Mahfouz, but also Arab writers. And for those who are not familiar with the area, when we are saying Arab writers, we are speaking of a whole region from the Gulf to the ocean. We have 22 countries. We have 400 million inhabitants with a great culture. And this needs really to be somehow translated and being well known to the other. You see the term Arabia, that's why these publishers insist to have this Arabia. The term Arabia holds a fantastic exotic connotation in the mind of Western and Eastern readers who were familiar or who are familiar with the 1001 Night. Sindbad, the sailor, the speaking animals, the jinnis, and it's fascinating, very fascinating themes actually in the Arabian Peninsula, in the Arabian Nights. And most people probably don't think that we, in the classical Arabic literature, we don't appreciate this work. And it does not really have a great place in the literature of the Arabs because of the language that is this Arabian Nights was written. It's a very low language, therefore you don't find it being taught in the respected academic institutions, except in the last, I would say, probably 30 to 40 decades, because this great book of Arabian Nights wasn't translated into almost every language, and then we have the reaction, and then people became looking at it. Because the translation, that's the good thing or the bad thing about translation. Translation, nothing to do with the wording. It's the theme, in fact, which attracts people. And of course, when you translate it in a good language, of course, the language itself, the original language, won't affect your translation. And to be honest, we in Saudi Arabia, which I'm talking about now, I mean, these books are related to Saudi Arabia, we do have great writers of novels, poetry, short stories. And some of them have been recognized as a good writer. The Arabic version of the Booker, the great prize for novels, and I'm glad that Dr. Ali is the one who's really supervising this great prize, the Arabic Booker for novels. Some of you might be surprised to learn Saudi Arabia is the only country among the 22 countries that their writers got the prize 3 times. Correct me, Dr. Ali, if I'm wrong. Raja Alim, Abdul Khal, and Muhammad Hassan Alwan. That means they are great writers, in fact. And of course, it doesn't mean the only, but these are the one who won the prize. But there are also great writers, male and female. I'm glad one of them is a female, in fact. And we think this literature really deserves to be translated. And translating Saudi literature and acculturating readers to its variety and depth is a shared responsibility, in fact. We are now more than ever deeply invested in conveying our literature and in enabling other culture to hear the fullness of our creative voice. But we need assistance from some of you, the publishers, because you are the agents of delivery for the words to all readers. We are eager and fully prepared to collaborate with publishers in selecting the best literary works for translation and publication in Western and Eastern languages. Luckily, Literature Publishing and Translation Commission, here Dr. Abdurrahman Al-Wasil from the Commission, in fact, here with us here today, and they are ready to communicate with those who are interested in such a project. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abdul Aziz. I think it's really fascinating to think about how everything really goes hand in hand. Essentially, questions of representation, storytelling, and how you translate cultures as well is really important. So before we take to the floor and ask anyone if they have any questions, I'd like to understand from both of you as people who have translated stories, translated poetry, was extremely elaborate as well. When you do that, you are essentially translating a culture and a time. What do you bear in mind as you do this, and how do you deal with the responsibility of translating such texts and pieces? So, Dr. Moneera, if you can go ahead first.
Thank you. How much time do you have? It happened that I'm fascinated with poetry and translating poetry since I was really young. One is the contemporary or modern Arabic poetry, especially Saudi. And another also obsession of mine, if you can allow me to use that word, is Nabati poetry, women's oral Bedouin poems. And also I went into a venture, very interesting one, translating, translating and retranslating 5 poetry collection by Badr ibn Abdul Mahsen. And I think, I can talk a lot about this topic. What's really fascinating about it is this translating cultures. And also how you can transfer this very specific, genres that are always, every text is related to its own cultural context, of course. But here there is something, very unique about, language itself, the dialect, certain usages of the dialect that was gone, old diction. It's a challenge for me, even to educate myself about that. But most important, how do you take this very difficult poetic, text and transfer them with ethical responsibility, cultural sensibility, and the poetic dimension and the aesthetic aspect of it. And it's very challenging. I never felt that I'm satisfied when I translate a poem. There is that, I would say, and I think Spivak said it as well, that the process of translation generates this duality of feeling, nostalgia and loss.
Beautiful. Thank you, Dr. Moneera. Dr. Abdul Aziz, a question to you.
Well, regarding the translation of poetry, actually translation, you are transferring the theme into other languages. Therefore, it's not translation, in fact. It's the translator's understanding of the poems. Therefore, I'm sure, especially the great poems, if you give it to 2 people, 3 people, you will have 3 different versions of the same poem, in fact. This is understanding, in fact. It's not really, it's a kind of building a poem by your understanding. And this is poetry is really so much difficult. Probably narratives is much easier for most of the novels and shorter stories, although some of them really very difficult because it has some connotations, understanding, and might probably some of the translators find some difficulties and find the right words for them. One aspect, if you don't mind, if I just add, is when I said 200 works has been translated, unfortunately, most of them are the effort of individuals. It's not through institutions. And with my respect, to our colleagues, the great writers, they think if his novel or short story collections was translated into English, that means he became an international writer, which is absolutely not true. And sometimes these books is being translated by someone who are not really expert in translation and being published by probably, with my respect, 3rd degree of publisher, and the book does not really go around. Therefore, it's not a matter of translation. Make sure you get the right books to be translated first, and you have to have in mind where is it going to be translated. A book that could be accepted in the West, different than the book that will be accepted in China. You are translating a culture to another culture. Therefore, you have to make sure that's really, the taste of the other culture is there in order to make sure that it will be reach these people. And most important, in fact, is sometimes and almost every single novel that has been translated, I mean, from Arabic literature, including Najib Mahfouz, when it translates in different languages, sometimes they delete one paragraph, they add another paragraph, they add, they play sometimes within the novel just to make sure that it fits the other cultures that you are translating into.
If you allow me, I can add.
And I would like to have some question from the why we. تفضل دكتور.
Just very quick, because I think you instigated these ideas. When the authors sometimes send their work to translators to be translated, I'm not sure if this is a good strategy. And here we need, to think about the selection and why do we select certain texts and based on what, and whether, they are going to be, again, transferred and carried and, represented aesthetically and culturally and linguistically very well in the other, in the target, called target language or not. So we have lots of problems. Very quick, I'll resurrect an old memory. When Girls of Riyadh was translated, I took the text and shared it with my students. They were absolutely disenchanted. They didn't want to read it because it didn't present anything, fascinating for them. While, a novel by very novella by Yusuf al-Mhamid, it was translated again with a different title.
It's a great novel.
Exactly,
novella, yes.
Wolves of the Crescent Moon. They were completely engaged and kept, inquiring about every aspect of it to the extent that I invited him to Harvard to talk to my students. So again, the selection is a very important, and I think, project like Kalima, like, the Commission and others, maybe they can activate big initiatives, and they have, of, translating literature from the Arabian Peninsula into different languages.
Thank you so much, Dr. and Dr. I wonder now if there's anybody in the audience that might have any questions to pose to our panelists today.
Just when it comes to, it's like a two-part.
Your name, please.
Oh, sorry, sir. My name is Saeed. I'm a journalist from the national newspaper in Abu Dhabi.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much. Just I have a two-part question, sir, ma'am. When it comes to, okay, how about this? What are the stories that are not being told from the Arabian Peninsula in terms of the narratives? Because as you were discussing, sir, there's a lot of sand, a lot of dunes have been, but so what are we missing out on stories about the metropolis? Are we missing out on urban stories? What kind of characters are not being written about that we should know about in Saudi Arabia? And the second part of that would be talking about the initiatives. What are the initiatives that are being had to help publishers from Frankfurt, international ones, to kind of enter the Saudi scene who are quite ignorant but want to know where to go? Thank you.
That's yours. That's area, your
Okay,
area.
I'll take the publishing, and then I think the earlier segment for you, Dr. Abdul Aziz. I am really concerned and focused on publishing, because I encountered challenges myself as an editor, as a writer, as a translator. And also my colleagues. I have a long list of scholars at Ivy League universities in the US who are struggling with this. When someone, let's say, publishing a book or wrote a book and it's related to, let's say, Lebanon, the answer, oh, this is a very narrow area. Geographically and culturally, we don't have readership. When I'm translating a selection of contemporary, Saudi poetry, and I take it to, like, I've been knocking on doors, so many, and I'm insisting to go to, big, publishers, Ivy League university publishers and others. I didn't go to the small presses yet because I'm still insisting, on going there and getting our literature, to be part of, the publishing industry in the West. What I received, one, we are, which is then, honest, is, or honest, I don't know, but it's a position that publishers taken in relation to the difficulty of publishing poetry and finding readership in general. And it becomes even difficult when it's a translated, poetry. So here we have a challenge that's very difficult. The other is in relation to Saudi Arabia. This is where can we, represent it in relation to, world literature? It's, as I said, it's almost non-existent. So this is, I think this is our task as scholars, translators, agents, and publishers, and also governmental entities or cultural organization to work on initiatives, creative one, innovative one, in relation, for instance, why don't we have publisher imprints? And I think, we started seeing some of these in the region. Why don't we have, something from Bloomsbury, from university presses, create, let's say, agreements and bring them to the region with, high standard criteria and have that diversity. We cannot just allow, the market to dictate the selection or also the political incentive, to select the sensational, text or the ones that, again, promote stereotype about the region. We don't see that diversity. We don't see the richness and uniqueness and the experimentation, whether in poetry or in the novel or short story. We don't see that except, as I said, fragmented, efforts based on individual, whether translator or scholar invested in this. And we need to also give subvention. This is, something, like part of best practices in, if you can call that, in the US, in also Western institution, that they give scholars subvention with amount of money to help with publishing their books. We don't have that in the Arab world. We don't have that also in the region, with the exception, of course, except, as I said, the Commission and the Center of Abu Dhabi for Arabic language. They have, generous subventions and support and fellowships. But we need more, and we need, very organized effort to enter the market and flood it. Can we do that? That's my wish. I don't know if I will live to see it.
Well, hopefully you will. I mean, this is the beginning. We're opening platforms, we're having discussions, and thankfully we're here in Frankfurt having that discussion with our colleagues, Literature Translation and Publishing Commission. So the question to you, Dr. Abdul Aziz, before we close.
Well, thank you. I think there are hundreds of stories that need to be told, in fact. But I would like to deal with Arabia as we did in the past. Of course, now when we talk of Arabia, the modern Arabia, we're talking of 7 countries. But when it's coming to cultures and literature, in fact, this is one literature. Therefore, I would like to see some projects like the one with the anthology from Arabia that talks or take examples from all the Arabia. It does not really differentiate. I don't know if the literature in Bahrain different than the in Qatar or the Emirates different than Oman. I think they are in the same region, they have the same background, they have gone through the same history. Therefore, we should deal with it, in fact, as, and in this case, if we have Arabian literature, that will probably change the mainstream thinking or the stereotyping of the Arabia, which used to be Arabian Nights. We do have a new Arabia, which is now that's the literature that we have. Thank you.
And thank you so much. It's nice to end on that we have a lot more to give. We are actually out of time right now, so thank you very much for listening with us today and joining Dr. Moneera Al-Ghadeer, Dr. Abdul Aziz Alsebail, and our conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.